like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Practical Technology Automation Ideas for Your Business. Today, we're really lucky to have Nathan Harper, the founder of Finlert, joining us to share with us some insight in relation to how we might use technology to automate some of these manual processes within our business. Nathan is the founder of Finlert, an organisation based out at Xero at the Innovation Campus that builds tools for businesses and accountants. He's the former Chief Technology Officer of SAI Global and founder of the Silicon Valley Group. So I'll hand over to Nathan now. He can provide a little bit more of a background as to what he does, and we'll kick off today's webinar.
Hey, thanks, Mark. Can you hear me okay? Yep, great. So, yeah, thanks for the intro. I'm a computer scientist by trade, was in roles at SAI Global, which is the commercial spin-off of Standards Australia back in the early 2000s. Ended up of a reasonable size and a couple thousand staff. And so we had technology teams all over the world building software, and kind of got to learn a lot about how to build software well, what stuff doesn't work, what stuff works, and looked at combinations of offshoring and onshoring and large teams and small teams, and kind of learnt a lot along the way. And my focus was primarily on customer-facing technology. So it was really around their compliance and risk technology, so large-scale risk management solutions for big banks and finance companies, and as well as property transfer and settlement, and regulatory and technical publishing as well. So we work for some of the biggest companies in the world providing these sorts of services. And it was a really interesting time for me and a good opportunity to learn. What I've been able to do more recently is kind of bring that experience back to Wollongong and kind of take a completely different approach. We're like a really small focused team, working, as Mark said, on the UOW Innovation Campus, and we work with students on their way through, as well as kind of experienced technology builders, and we fundamentally make apps for the Xero marketplace. So whether they're small business focused or accountant focused, the idea is that we're building solutions for that space. And along the way, we've kind of learned a lot about how to do integrations between things like Xero and other systems. We've also got lots of experience building to large platforms like ASIC and the ATO as well. And so we've kind of been able to roll this experience together and kind of use that to help other people along their journey. And there's some really interesting kind of insights that we've picked up along the way that I wanted to talk about today. And really, we've got these kind of common issues that we see in businesses, these patterns that come up over and over and over. And we think they're really easy to overcome these issues and to introduce automation into businesses. Once you get a reasonable understanding of what's possible in a cloud-based environment. Going to talk about some practical examples of this today. So these are, solutions that we've actually worked on for businesses, and kind of explain some of the key steps and terminology that you might need in order to do this sort of stuff in your own business.
Awesome. Sorry, just before you go on, I always forget to do something at the start of these webinars. Today I forgot to do two things. One is, if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A section through the webinar. And then secondly, to introduce Nick Fitzgerald from our Business Advisory Division, who is also with us here today. Sorry, Nick. Nick does a lot of work internally in our office around particularly now the technology side and working with businesses to use their data to facilitate decision making and the like. So welcome to Nick as well.
Thanks, Mark. It's all good. I'm used to being forgotten.
Sorry, Nathan.
Okay, so I guess the most common issue that we see is this idea of, you might call it data silos, but fundamentally there's this issue where data is spread across various systems because we use so many different platforms today, whether it's off-the-shelf solutions like even things like Excel and Access, through to custom solutions that have been developed for your business, or perhaps you're using some sort of industry-based software, right through to not only places where you store data, but places where you store files. So whether that's something like Google Drive or OneDrive, lots of data in Office 365, and now we've got more and more solutions coming along, like cloud-based payment technology like Stripe. It's really easy to end up with lots of different data in lots of different places. And it may be things like, where your timesheet data is going, project budgets, prices of products, expenses, shipping information, payments, etc., etc. It's really easy to end up with little bits of information spread all over the place. And sometimes that introduces a lot of manual processes into our businesses.
I think that's one of the things certainly that we've experienced in our business, and Nick's been sort of working on this as a project as part of his sort of portfolio in the business, is that we are fit that situation to a T as our business has grown, and as we've seen new pieces of software that enable us to do more things. All of a sudden, we've found ourselves with 5 different databases that we need to update. I think we've got one for our practice management, one for our tax, one for our email and workflow, one for our self-managed super funds. There's probably some others there, Nick, that I've forgotten as well.
One for our engagement software.
So we've gone from using the one generic off-the-shelf piece of software that's actually not cloud-based to now using 5 or 6 different products that are all cloud-based, but not necessarily talking to each other either.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, right? Is that these cloud-based solutions come along and they're really good. They're really deep in one particular segment. So you think, yeah, okay, we'll use that cloud solution for that little piece of the puzzle. And then if it's never really integrated, you end up with a lot of manual rekeying between different systems. And then one of the biggest areas that we see is with cloud-based finance systems, right? So, there's all this talk about, the cloud being amazing, and it unlocks all of this new functionality and new ideas and new ways to think. And then the reality is that it actually can make it a lot harder as well if we end up with data in all different places. The good news is there's some pretty easy answers to these questions coming up soon. Don't get too demoralized. And so, yeah, we've faced this challenge a lot, specifically with Xero and QuickBooks and MYOB to a certain extent, where the idea is that a lot of times there's data being rekeyed into these systems. So I guess how do we actually move that data around day to day? And really there's 3 different ways that we see today. Number one, by far the biggest, is data reentry. So fundamentally very time consuming, prone to error, especially when you're entering data into finance systems. It's really easy to put the decimal place in the wrong spot and for data to end up quite wrong. And fundamentally, it's pretty demotivating as well. When you give staff tasks which essentially says, we've got the data here, we need to get it here, you need to rekey it all, especially when that's like an ongoing process, like every single day we have to keep this up to date. It can be quite demotivating and doesn't provide a lot of achievement for those staff. So that's one of the classic areas that we see by far the highest. The next is using some sort of export or import. So maybe once a day we'll export out of that system and import into this system. Usually the challenge there is whether it's even available and whether the formats will suit. So you might be able to export out of one to CSV and then the next one doesn't take that as an import format, or the columns that you get out of the first one don't match the columns that the second one needs. So sometimes you're going to have to do some sort of transformation in between. Once again, can be time consuming and it relies on a manual process. So it's easy to forget to do it, or it doesn't happen when Joe's on leave, or it doesn't happen on public holidays, for example, like yesterday. So, you've got a lot of manual processes there. And then there's always this question about whether the data is up to date in the second system. Because it's like, did the process run today? Did it run yesterday? How do we ever know that it's really kind of up to date? And the third that we find is this idea of, maybe there's some integration already in place. So you see that it's really common these days with things like Xero and other systems where you go, fantastic, it's already integrated with my, builder's job management system that I'm using. Fantastic. Or it's already integrated with Workflow Max. It's owned by the same company. Fantastic. What could possibly go wrong? But the challenges that we've seen with this is that sometimes it doesn't actually work the way that you want it to work. There's lots of ways to integrate. Maybe it pulls some of the data and not all of the data. Sometimes it's not automatic, so it still requires you to manually press a button each time. So fundamentally, it's not much better than import and export. And then I guess the last point is, will it be supported ongoing? We've seen lots of challenges where people have come to us and said, we turned on this integration with this software, but now we need it to do X or Y. We need this extra piece of data to go through, and they won't support us. They're kind of saying, that's it. That's all the functionality that we're going to offer. So there's this ongoing challenge about how supportable that's going to be in the future.
We've certainly got some sort of war stories about that point in particular, around setting up an integration and then, finding someone's changed the way they're dealing with different aspects of their software, and also things that we things come up down the track that sort of didn't exist when the integration was done. We've had some issues with third-party software, talking to QuickBooks Online, for example, in relation to the taxable payments reports, where that created a whole lot of extra work for us in the office. And I think the other important point that I just wanted to make, particularly in relation to that data re-entry part, what often happens in businesses is you have highly skilled people doing manual data entry, and it's not the best use of their time, as you mentioned, from both a financial point of view, but also from a motivation point of view. Our skilled people want to be doing the things that they're skilled at, not recreating data. So with all those, common issues that we've got, what are our options? What can we do?
Yeah, so we get asked that question a lot. What options are out there? How expensive is it? And really, how practical is it? Because I think over the years, we've come to expect that this sort of work is very expensive and very complicated and time consuming. The good news is that a lot of that has changed in recent times. So there's lots of possibilities, but fundamentally they fall for us into three different categories. So the first is that there will be an existing integration. So really easy to search for this stuff and do a little bit of research yourself. If you look at things like the Xero Marketplace or the QuickBooks App Store, you can really quickly see whether your particular application that you want to link is already supported. And a lot of times, if you're using something like Office 365, there's lots of solutions for that as well. So kind of look to those app stores. They're becoming a really big part of the business. So we work with Xero. What they tell us is that these apps and these app stores are becoming a fundamentally extremely important part of their product, and they know that if users try their product and install one or more apps, they're much more likely to continue through to subscription. So these guys are really heavily supporting their marketplaces and their app store builders, and they're really trying to make it smoother and easier for you to sign up for these apps. And they're encouraging us to build lots of them. So what you'll find is that more and more solutions will come to those stores, which will help out a lot. The next kind of level, if there's nothing available in that sense, is what we call connector applications. So one that we use quite heavily is Zapier. There's a few others in that space, Automate.io, Tray.io. And fundamentally what these systems do is they kind of act as a middleman. So Zapier, for example, has a connector to Xero, and then it has lots of other connectors as well. So it might have one to a system that you're using, whether that's a stock control system or a store or a payment system or anything like that. And the idea is that it can pull data from one system and pop it into another. And it can do that kind of on demand. So you can say, every time a new invoice is made over here, automatically pop it into Xero for me. And so they can be really low cost ways of doing a little bit of integration without having to build custom software. And then the third level, if that's still not available, that's when you kind of drop down to, okay, we're going to have to build a piece of software. And really they rely on these things called APIs, application programming interfaces. And what that means in a really kind of simple sense, I've got a little diagram here. We're going to get a little bit technical. It's all about a way for applications to talk to each other that's not just through the user interface that you're using to click buttons. It's really just an electronic way for two applications to communicate. So solutions like Xero and QuickBooks Online are kind of built right from the start with a really strong API. And what that means is that people can write their own software that then does things like inject invoices, it can read up information and produce special reports. It can, send out emails for you or alert you to particular things in your software, or it can just populate data from one system to another in a really straightforward manner. And you find that most cloud-based systems today have APIs available, and they don't cost any more to use them. They're just treated like a regular user. But what it does, from a software perspective, it's really powerful because it allows us to, custom make software that will do particular things inside platforms like Xero.
Yeah. I guess, when you look at the framework and how the sort of the software market's been developing over, at least the last 5 years and probably before that, prior to that, the idea was that your business would use a piece of software and that would do everything for your business. And I probably go back to an example, and it's probably getting back 20 years ago now, with BuildSoft. So BuildSoft was quite popular in the building industry. It was really good at estimating for jobs. It was really good at tracking job budgets and the like. But then it also tried to be a CRM, and it also had a finance function to it, so the accounting side. And what was common with that is that it do one part of the job really, really well, but in BuildSoft's case, that the financial reporting side really wasn't very good at all. And then GST came in and was all over. And I think where the software market's heading at the moment is that each individual, provider is operating in their niche area. So we've got, software companies that are focused on purely the financial side of things. So they're the Xero and the QuickBooks and the MyUp, as you mentioned, and then others that are just focused on, CRM side of things or workflow and the like. And that's been really the change that's been going on at least for the last 5 years and probably prior to that.
Yeah, and they're using these APIs so that they can go, we don't have to be the finance system as well.
Yep.
We can leave that to, you can have your own personal preference about which platform you use for finance, and we'll just hook up to it, which creates a lot of power and allows them to go much deeper into their own domain without having to pretend to be the finance system and the stock control system and everything.
So you mentioned connectors before, so we might jump into an example about how you might use a connector.
Yeah, so this one is actually one of our businesses. So we have these applications on the Xero App Store, and we had this challenge where we've essentially got a monthly subscription product. And what we wanted was the ability to just automatically bill people's credit cards every month. We didn't want to go through the hassle of setting up direct debit arrangements. We didn't want to go through the hassle of setting up a merchant system with a bank and actually have to have terminals and all that sort of stuff. And so what we did was we selected this product called Stripe. So it's a cloud-based payment platform. What happens is that they handle the credit card transactions for us. They handle the credit card numbers, so we never see the credit card numbers. Clients only ever give it to Stripe. And then Stripe does this billing on a regular basis. So it can charge somebody $10 a month really easily, or $100 a year. And it will do cool stuff like it'll offset if they've got a trial period and all of that sort of stuff, discount codes, all that sort of stuff straight out of the box. And they take a small percentage of your transactions, which is comparable to sometimes lower than regular merchant fees. So we chose this product to do our monthly billing. Awesome. The good news is there's already in the Xero App Store, there's a connector between Stripe and Xero. Fantastic. So we turned that on, and what we found was that, while they say that there's existing integration, it actually only works the other way. So if you make an invoice in Xero, it will pass it through to Stripe for a credit card payment to be made. But anybody who's tried to do recurring billing in Xero would know that it's pretty average. It's not very well done. So we ran into this problem where we couldn't easily get invoices generated in Stripe every month, because we wanted this to just be automated, because we was charging a low monthly fee. We didn't want to have to be touching these transactions. We needed them back into Xero. So yeah, we could have built custom software that read up every time there was a transaction in Stripe, and we could have put it into Xero. But what we found was that Zapier already has connections with Stripe and to Xero. And with a little bit of configuration, and it's almost like a visual configuration. So you go, every time there's a new invoice in Stripe, grab the data associated with it, and you kind of drag and drop, and you go, okay, I want this to go into the description of the invoice, this to go into the value, this to go into the invoice number, so on and so on. And then, if it's, this type of invoice, put it to this account in Xero. And then Zapier just handles that for us. So every time there's a new transaction in Stripe, within like a second, it automatically gets into Xero for us as an invoice to be paid. And then when we get our actual payout, so when we get the disbursement from Stripe for all the credit card payments that week, they get allocated against the actual those invoices. So we've got a really clear record of the transaction that's nice and auditable, and we can really easily see whether there's any invoices that have fallen through the cracks as well. And the cost for that is actually $30 a month for the Zapier subscription, which is really affordable. Set up kind of a once-off sort of investment, because you set it up once and then it kind of runs forever. And Zapier was $30 a month only because Xero is considered a premium plugin for those guys. So there's actually a lot that you can do with a free subscription. But as soon as you tip into Xero or QuickBooks, they start charging you $30 a month, which is a pretty good fee for this sort of functionality.
Just going across to Nick, if you could sort of maybe share some examples of some of the different integrations some of your clients might be using.
Yeah, we've got a lot, but probably trying to use some of these examples that Nathan's talking about, or tools for a lot more clients. But look, we've had clients that are working with point of sale software, whether it's cafe or restaurant, that might be vend or counter, flowing everything straight through into Xero. Mark, you're aware of a few in the trade and construction game, Buildertrend, Co-Construct, and how they might feed straight into Xero or QuickBooks Online. And then we also have clients with online booking software for accommodation, and they'll use a combination of things like Stripe and Equid for their payment gateways, so that people can book accommodation, for, let's say, cabin style accommodation on an individual bed basis as opposed to group bookings. So there's quite a lot there. And for me, when I look at the cost of $30 a month and a once-off investment, you start to question sometimes whether you can afford not to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really about having that mindset about, okay, stepping back away from things and saying, well, what am I doing manually? What's a duplication and how can I fix it? And the solution won't always be as easy as the Stripe Zapier Xero solution. A lot of them will be, but some of them will be more difficult. Often there is a solution to most problems out there, but then you dip into, we need to now weigh up what the cost of those solutions are, because obviously the more customized and complicated the solution becomes, the larger the investment.
Yeah, you touched on something earlier, Mark, just about making sure people are doing the right things within an organisation. And for me, doing a lot of work on the business improvement space, often with business owners who wear a lot of hats themselves, and I'm sure Nathan could probably attest to this, but it really is a case of making sure that you're spending your time or your focus in the right areas to enable your business to be able to grow or scale. And if you're constantly sort of bogged down in manual processes, you're doing what we refer to as low value activities, where you can release that pressure valve and even focusing on saying, how do I find an automated solution? To me, that's something that you should be focusing on to enable to free yourself up long term.
Yeah, and we certainly do that in our business as well. So when there's a new process that gets introduced, we kind of think, how are we going to do this when it's 10 times or 100 times this number? because that's where we get our economies of scale. And so we have to build it for that sort of scale right from the start, so that otherwise it's really easy to get sucked into, we'll just manually do it. We'll just manually do it. Now we're doing it 10 times a day. Now we're doing it 100 times a day.
Yeah, exactly right. And straight away then, Nathan, that takes your time away from other business development opportunities.
Yeah.
How do you then connect with other businesses who actually need the tools and the systems you're building?
Yeah, exactly.
So you mentioned as part of that, this concept of an API. And I think we've got an example coming up as to how we'd use an API to, I guess, solve a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So this was another business that came to us where a bit of an unusual one. So not a lot of off-the-shelf solutions available. So they essentially make payments on external bills, then claim the value of those bills from a government department as part of a process. And they receive bulk payment for those periodically. So they really had no way to reconcile those incoming bulk payments without lots of manual data entry and manual reconciliation. And we were talking like hundreds of records a day. So they had this challenge where they had to make it reconcilable. And what we ended up doing was working with the Xero API. And what this application does is it actually reads up all of the bills that they've paid and automatically generates invoices in Xero for them that are then able to reconcile against the bulk payment that comes in. So they may be, several hundred records that then associate with one bulk payment. And what that does is that goes from dealing with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of records a day for reconciliation down to 2 clicks, because Xero sees the transaction and if you've used that reconciliation screen, you know that it just turns green and they're able to allocate a single payment against hundreds of records in 1 click. So it's pretty powerful. We ran some quick numbers as part of the business case on this one. And let's say that they're, conservatively only spending 2 hours a day manually doing this. I think it would be double that if I was doing it. So that's roughly $1,600 a month replaced. And this was replaced by a once-off investment of around $5,000. So that's a pretty good business case, especially when this business was scaling up at the same time. So they had to go from these numbers to 2 or 3 times these numbers without having to introduce new costs into the business. So really what that did was free up staff to work on the things that were more important to them. It eliminated a lot of manual errors as well, because as you know, manually reconciling hundreds of records a day can be quite tedious and is really easy to screw up. And it allowed them to scale as well. So it was, I guess it's a good example to show that even if you fall to the bottom of those, the 3 layers where we said, find it in the App Store, use a connector, last resort, build some software. Even if you fall to the build some software model, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money either. There can be ways to do this stuff quite cost effectively.
So when, a business might be starting from scratch or looking at its, I guess, its software, we call it a software stack. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things, when it comes to software that they should be sort of keeping an eye on when they're deciding to go one way or the other?
Yeah, definitely the availability of the things that we've talked about. So really you want to pick a cloud-based solution for lots of different reasons. One is this ability to automate, but 2, just the ability to access it from anywhere, not have to run a server or any infrastructure for it, not have to run backups and security and all that sort of stuff. It all gets looked after for you. But yeah, you just want to make sure that they do have an API available, and that's usually public information that's on their website. I'm sure their salespeople will be able to answer that question for you. And even better if it already interfaces with one of these connector applications like Zapier, because that will make a huge difference when it comes to integrating it with your other systems or automating the software.
Yeah, and I guess it's the point that you mentioned earlier. It's think about the solution not for the way the business is now, but for how the business might look in 3 or 5 years' time. You also mentioned as part of that a cloud-based solution. Are you finding people are becoming more and more comfortable in the cloud?
Oh, definitely. There's really very few barriers to that these days. I think people are starting to understand that once they're on, Office 365 and all of their documents are in the cloud, they see that flexibility. And now the idea of putting their budgets there and their projects there and all that sort of stuff is a very low hurdle. We saw a change quite recently. We worked with a client who's in the health space, and while previously New South Wales Health has required that all software is installed on the premises at every single hospital, they've made a change recently to completely free that up so that they can all their software can be hosted on a cloud-based environment, and they can use cloud solutions now. So even those guys have worked through all of the challenges associated with the cloud and said that, yeah, they're good to go. So that's a pretty good endorsement.
Yeah. And I guess that's, one of those things with COVID and people working more remotely and at home, obviously those businesses that were already cloud-based or even sort of were running some sort of hosted server type setup were clearly at an advantage when their workers were sort of forced to work at home.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, as the slide suggests, how do we get started on this journey?
Really, I would say work through a few simple steps and really going from the lowest cost to the highest cost. Research the options that are already available through your existing software providers. More and more people have their own app stores full of great products, and their sales team will be more than happy to talk to you about that sort of stuff. If there's nothing already built, look for connectors, and then if all else fails, talk to somebody about actually building a custom solution. And just about all of these cloud providers have these authorized partners now. So the idea is that they can give you a list of software providers from all over the world who can build these connections for you. And then I guess on top of all of that, you've got to kind of visualize your data flow. So you kind of got to go decide exactly what you want before you start tinkering with it. It's the short way to say it. So try and work out what's going to work for your business, and then try and work towards that solution, perhaps rather than just taking whatever is available off the shelf and then perhaps ending up down a dead end at some point. Try and work that out from the start, and then find a solution that matches your needs. And if the existing software doesn't match the needs, that's okay. You can fall down to the bottom of this tree and end up with a piece of custom software to just bridge some of those gaps for you.
Yeah, I guess and we as I said, we've sort of got issues relating to technology and how our different pieces of software talk. And I guess an easy way for someone to get started is just to create a list of grievances. Just start writing down everything that you don't like doing or don't think you should be doing. And then once you've got that sort of list of issues, then like we said, solve the easy ones first and work your way through that list. But I think engaging with someone that's got experience in this area is really important, because it does often require a separate mindset and it often requires someone to challenge the status quo. And quite often we can be comfortable falling into what we know and what we're comfortable with. So to have someone to come in and say, well, why are you doing that? That's, do you know that there's another way that could save you X amount of time is really important, because often we get so entrenched in our own business that we can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah, definitely.
Just got a couple of quick questions. One, it's not really a question, but a comment of one of our attendees has just pointed out that they're using Zapier at the moment to link Facebook ad responses to their CRM system.
Yeah. So you can definitely do that sort of thing. You can use it for all sorts of requirements, including just things like, I want to be notified in email every time somebody clicks on one of our ads, or drop a row in this spreadsheet when, this happens, or somebody pays an invoice. I want to know about it. So you can use it for moving data around, or for notifications, or if you use a messaging product like Slack or Teams, it can even message you when certain things happen. So it's pretty flexible, especially for the price. It's a very powerful piece of software.
And then a question, I'll probably throw it out to the two of you. What are the signs that a system should be automated? I.e. duplication of data, bottlenecks in the business, or business complaints?
I think all of those.
The person's just answered their question.
They are the key signs. And covering that was also going back. For me, one of the key things is you don't need to know about the ins and outs of all of these solutions. You just need to be able to identify a bottleneck or a process that you find really tedious in your business, and then seek out the people with the knowledge. And Nathan touched on it earlier, but one of the resources that's been the most beneficial to me over the last few years really is the Xero and QuickBooks marketplaces. I think they're a great place to do some initial research, to start to understand what possibilities actually already exist. And then you actually get a lot of reviews and feedback from other people, where you'll be able to identify really similar business problems and determine what products may not work for you because somebody else who's got the same issue as you has already identified that it doesn't work.
Yeah, chances are you're not as special as you think you are. And that somebody out there will have already had the same problem.
Yep. Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
The forums are really good for that as well. Xero and QuickBooks have really active forum spaces where people are kind of asking these sorts of questions and pointing out issues with existing solutions all the time.
That's excellent. Well, I just like to finish off by thanking Nathan for his time today. Really appreciate it. Great insight as to what can be done when it comes to automating certain processes in your business. It doesn't have to be that scary. I think that's probably one of my key takeaways. Often the solution is a simple solution. But I think as a starting point for business owners out there is start making a note of some of the things that you either don't enjoy doing, or you don't understand why you're doing it, or you don't like doing it. And then start that list, and then slowly work your way through looking at some solutions. And some solutions are going to be cheaper than others. Some solutions are going to be easier than others. But when you're doing that, try and keep an open mind, and also challenge the status quo when it comes to these things. So thanks again, Nathan. And Nathan's done work with a number of our clients who have been down this path and are really starting to see the benefits. So again, thanks for your time today, Nathan. Thanks also for your insight as well, Nick. Sorry for skipping over you at the start. Next week's presentation has been a little bit of a change to our program. Next week, we're going to do the federal budget update. So the 2020 federal budget is coming out today or tonight. It's been a little while since the budgets have been handed down at this time of year. Normally it's sort of in May, but obviously COVID has impacted everything this year. So this is going to be a really significant budget, a really important budget, and we're anticipating lots of measures that will affect small and medium businesses in particular. So we're going to take the opportunity next Tuesday to provide a sort of a federal budget update with Gary, Angela, Nick and myself, and or provide some insight as to how this year's budget will affect small business owners. So again, we'd invite you to join us next Tuesday for that. So that's about it. Thanks everyone for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you next week.